Anyway, so we got some information here. I was alerted to the fact on Twitter that it's an anniversary this weekend of one of the big Smoky Mountain Wrestling events, one of my favorites that we did, the Super Saturday Night Fever show. January 20th, the people will hear this a couple of days late, but January 28th, 1995 was this event. And somebody alerted me that it was the anniversary on Twitter, as I mentioned, and I looked back at the card and some of the details. And this is a kind of a good example of the territory wrestling payoff system and just the booking of the buildings, all the old territory stuff that the listeners seem to like the behind-the-scenes business aspect of. This kind of illustrates a good one. And I also have, which we're going to compare it to, another one of the payoff sheets from Paul Bosch's Houston Wrestling that had been floating around, came out from the Bosch estate sale, with the payments to the wrestlers and, what the gross was for the event and all that stuff. And they're 15 years apart, but it's kind of interesting because Houston was in the peak of the territory days in 1980. The Smoky Mountain Show was in 1995 when there were almost no territories and we were trying to bring one back. But it's kind of interesting to compare, even though I was not in any way trying to mimic the Houston card or do anything the same as we'll talk about it. It's kind of comparable because this was territory wrestling. And the reason why that we were doing, by the way, Super Saturday Night Fever comes from the next day on Sunday was the Super Bowl that year, January 29th. And I will give some explanation as to the Knoxville wrestling schedule. For years, Friday night was Knoxville Wrestling Night. Every Friday night when it was a weekly territory, except during football season. Because in East Tennessee, and we've mentioned this, with University of Tennessee football is the biggest drawing sports or entertainment event in the state of Tennessee, without question. As an ongoing enterprise, they might do a standalone, concert festival somewhere that draws more people, but for an ongoing event, UT football is it. And high school football in that part of the country is popular also. So in East Tennessee, Knoxville, whatever territory or whatever promotion was running the territory during football season would switch to Sunday afternoon shows to stay away from high school and college football during that time of the year. And this is something that not only, Knoxville had strange wrestling traditions. We've talked about them in the 60s and 70s, well, back in the 50s. It was the only city in the country that 8 months out of the year, their weekly wrestling event, its primary location was outdoors at Chilhowie Park. That was completely unique in the wrestling business in the country. And they had so when we started running Smoky Mountain, even the Coliseum folks, because they'd been there for 20 years, they said, we always switch during football season to Sundays because of football. And before that, they did it from Chilhowie Park. So that led to issues with trying to get the exact right dates. And I know a lot of the promoters now, they go, well, if you want to run a town and you know a building you want to run, you go to that building, you see what their open dates are, you figure out a date a few months in advance, and you check and make sure you can get the talent you want on that date, because you're going to have to fly somebody in if it's any show of any kind of size, flying some name wrestlers, blah, blah, blah. And you plan that, and then you've got your dates you want that you can get talent on, and you promote it for a few months. In the territories, you were literally running the same town, the same building every week, every 2 weeks, or once a month, depending on what your schedule was. The big northeastern territories where they ran the towns once a month, all the smaller southern territories ran once a week. Well, we were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We were running our major towns once a month. I've thought in hindsight that we probably could have done the same or a little bit better if we ran Knoxville every 2 weeks, because we'd get the same base fans, but nevertheless. So once a month, and Brian, this is another thing that I learned before I even got in the wrestling business. I learned this from Christine Jarrett. And again, people are going to scoff at this, but this is the way it was done. In the territory days, if you had a big show that you really, you had a lot invested in, or you had big names coming in, or the champion or whatever, or if you had a new spot show town, it's the first time you'd been there, whatever, you wanted to stagger your bigger events toward the first of the month. You didn't want to run, even if you ran a weekly territory, and that meant 4 weeks every month, and some weeks 5 times, you would want your bigger events at the beginning of the month. And Brian, you know why, or do you? Spill it.
Why do you want your events at the beginning of the month? Because people get paid.
Exactly. Not only they get paid the 1st and the 15th, but also the Social Security checks and the welfare checks came out at the beginning of the month. And that was, in large part, a lot of the base of the territories. The fans were, when they got the checks, that's when they had money to spend. They'd either go to the matches within the next day or two, or they might buy the advance tickets. But again, that's why, the people who booked the towns for these territories, they especially paid attention and loaded up the first of the month because people had more money to spend. So, but then we got off kilter, and I'll give you an example. In 1993 in Smoky Mountain, we ran Thanksgiving and did very well, and ran Christmas and did very well. But we didn't want to come back in January. You can't come back if you run once a month. You don't want to come back with a big show again a week or two later. You've just been there. But we didn't want to wait till the end of the month, or we didn't want to run the end of the month in January, because that's the end of the fucking month. So looking at the available dates, that's when Sandy Scott had booked February 13th. I believe that's what it was, February 13th, 1994. And I said, okay, we're going to be out 6 weeks instead of 4. We'll load that card up. We've got 6 weeks to promote it. That was the blow-off between Terry Funk and Bullet Bob Armstrong, etc. So we're going to call it Sunday Bloody Sunday, and we're really going to push this thing. And that's when, coming off of doing well on Thanksgiving and very well on Christmas, we did 4,000 people and $33,000 at the gate, our all-time record for Sunday Bloody Sunday. We've been out 6 weeks. We came back in the middle of the month of February. It's cold weather outside. It was a Sunday afternoon, didn't conflict with football. And they came. So the next year, we're going to try to do the same thing. However, again, in 1994, we did good on Thanksgiving. We did good on Christmas. But months before that, we had tried to book these dates. And the Coliseum, that's where there was an issue. In February, they had some recurring event. It might have been the circus that had the Coliseum booked for 10 days, one of those long runs, right? It took up our first couple of Sundays, and we didn't want to stay out for like 7 or 8 weeks. So fuck it. So we'll go the Saturday night, the night before the Super Bowl, because we obviously aren't going to run that Sunday afternoon. It's the Super Bowl, but there's, people paying attention to things going on. And that worked. I think in hindsight, if we could have presented this card 2 weeks earlier in the month and we hadn't just been there for Christmas, it would have done even better. But nevertheless, the night before the Super Bowl, Saturday night, rare night for wrestling in Knoxville back in those days, but it worked. Here was the card, Brian. The opening match, D'Lo Brown, the Gangsta's assistant, defeated Brian Logan. Boo Bradley defeated Chris Candido. Boo Bradley, obviously later known to the ECW fans as Balls Mahoney.
If I remember right, this is right when you had to start finishing up Chris, too, right?
Yes, because Chris was No, it was a little, well, we had some word. It was a little bit later, but he was going to put Boo over anyway because Boo had been taken under Mick Foley's wing and Mick gave him his special tights and everything. So I think Chris was going to be around for another month or two, but still. The Smoky Mountain Tag Team title was supposed to be on the line with the Rock and Roll Express defending against Eddie Gilbert and Unabomb. And Eddie had come and done the 4 weeks of TV leading up to this, and then we never saw him again. So since we didn't know until he didn't come that he actually wasn't going to come, we had a single match with Ricky Morton against Unabomb, obviously, who would later become Kane, and obviously who would later become the mayor of fucking Knoxville. The first night that the people of Knoxville saw their future mayor was January 28th, 1995. And Ricky won by disqualification because we wanted to try to make the people a little happy since we were fucking them out of a tag team title match, but it was way too early to beat Glenn, so it was a disqualification. And by, what was it, a week or two later, 9 days later, by the time we did TV, I had Al Snow ready to come in and play the part of Eddie Gilbert. And he actually did probably a better job than Eddie would. And not at being Eddie Gilbert, but at being Al Snow. Anyway, next was the number one contender match where we would determine the number one contender for the next Smoky Mountain Championship match. And that was Buddy Landel, the heel that I had just brought back in because he was Good Buddy again. He was Good Buddy when he was a heel. Buddy Landel beat Tracy Smothers. Then Buddy was also scheduled to be the timekeeper in the Smoky Mountain Championship match where the Dirty White Boy defended the Smoky Mountain Heavyweight title against Jerry the King Lawler. And some way or another, with Buddy Landel at ringside, wouldn't you know what happened? Lawler beat Dirty White Boy and won the championship. But fortunately, Dirty White Boy was able to turn the tables on Landel immediately afterwards in a lights-out match and beat Buddy Landel. And people are thinking, what the fuck? Cornette was on drugs. We were setting up a three-way rivalry, or had set up a three-way rivalry with two heels and one babyface. Lawler and Landel as the heels with nothing to do with each other, and White Boy was the babyface. And then Lawler was basically transferring the title, but not the way they thought, because then the next month we would have Lawler. We'd have Lawler was supposed to defend the title in a return match against Dirty White Boy, but that no good Landel would injure White Boy beforehand, and the person to step up and substitute for him would be Bobby Blaze, who ended up beating Lawler and winning the title. And yeah, we had some intrigue going on. But anyway, keeping people busy. After White Boy beat Landel in the lights out match, then the Heavenly Bodies had come back from the WWF to take on the Gangstas, New Jack and Mustafa, because when the Gangstas had beaten up the Rock and Roll Express Christmas night, I was in the Rock and Roll's corner, and the Gangstas had also turned on me and nightsticked me and busted me open and blah, blah, blah. So I brought the Bodies back, and we had a double disqualification to set up the following month. In Knoxville, we came back with a 6-man tag with D-Lo and I involved. In Johnson City, we had a Smoky Mountain street fight. And the finish of this match was a double disqualification because it spilled out of the ring. And we actually went down the aisle, went out the back door of the Coliseum. A camera followed us. And God dang it, I can't remember what the name of the street is outside the Coliseum, but the Gangstas, dressed as they normally did, the Heavenly Bodies in their trunks with shooting stars and comets on them, and me in a pink suit waving a tennis racket, beating D-Lo Brown over the head at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night before the Super Bowl, came out of the back of the Knoxville Civic Coliseum, went across the road with cars coming, beating on each other, and chased them up the hill into the Marriott parking lot. And then Ricky Morton won a 15-man Smoky Mountain Rumble. Actually, I think we did that earlier in the night because I don't think the gangsters came back from the Marriott. But anyway, with that card, we did 1,741 people paid and 193 comps. And the comps, most of the comps were paid in another fashion because they mostly went to sponsors. We gave probably 40 to 60 tickets to the radio station. They would do ticket giveaways, and they would announce your event when they did it, so it was a free plug. So those we would give the tickets away, but mostly the free tickets that we pulled went to sponsors like Mrs. Winters, Classy Motors, whoever that are paying us money per month, and they get those tickets to give to their customers. So we're putting up their banner, we're running their commercial on a show we're already paying for, and we're giving them tickets. So we had no money out of our pockets, so we took that money and said, okay, they bought the tickets. Anyway, so having said that, it was a total of 1,934 people paying a gross of $15,486. The taxes were $1,180, which left a net of $14,305. Now, that was 1995. In today's money, that would be a gross of $28,330 and a net of $26,169. But this is kind of interesting because as I was looking at this in comparison with the Houston statement, we kind of hit the same thing with a different formula on the payoff. Because I've mentioned in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, we couldn't put the guys on the traditional payoff on the house deal and keep the talent because we were only running 4 days a week. And while some of our shows were big, most of our shows were smaller. And so if we put guys on minimum guarantees so that they knew what they were having and per week, and then the idea was instead of running 2 shows, we're going to run 4 or 5 and split that guarantee up so that each show costs us less. But it wasn't the formula that the territories used to use because in those days they were not only drawing bigger crowds because wrestling was healthier, but they were running every night of the week and they kept guys busy. But on this show, as I mentioned, our net was $14,305. Well, the rent on the Knoxville Civic Coliseum, the ticketing, the Ticketmaster charge, the staffing, we've gone over this, ticket takers, police, etc. The total of that was $3,737 for everything. We rented the number 2 building in Knoxville, a 6,000-seat building that had been there for 40 years that everybody in East Tennessee within 100 miles knew how to get to. Is a major facility. The big acts went there. And we got out of the place all in, everything, including staffing, for $3,737 because we rented the building 12 times a year. They liked wrestling. Bob Polk, that time, was still involved with the Coliseum. He had been there for years and worked with Continental and a bunch of the different wrestling promotions. So we got a good deal, and we kept the expenses down as much as we could. Still today, that $3,737 is $6,836 in today's money. Explain to me where you can go now and rent the number 2 building in any town, a 6,000-seat building, $6,800. And the talent was $3,977. So right at about what the rent and staffing was. And if you look at our gross, for once we were kind of right in the ballpark. Sometimes we were too hot and sometimes we were too cold, but about $4,000 is approximately 30% of the gate, which is what the old-time promoters used to supposedly be paying the boys. 30 to 35% of the net gate after taxes was supposed to go to talent. In our case, the guys on top on this one honestly made a little bit less than they would have made in the territory system. And the guys in the opening match made a little bit more because we had a $75 minimum. And a lot of the guys, you know, were on $400 or $450 a week. So you would divide that over 3 shows or whatever. But as we've mentioned, the Rock and Roll Express, the Babyfaces, they made more money on gimmicks. But nevertheless, the only other expenses we had on this show, we spent $306 on the TV spots and $175 on the ring crew. So the total of our expenses for this was 17 talents on the card, including 2 referees, were $8,195. That's what it cost to run that show. That means we came home with $6,110. In today's money, that would be $14,992 left over and $11,177 that we brought home. Now, of course, we had to pay the Knoxville TV, and we were spending somewhere around $800 a week to get on TV then. So we brought home $6,110. We spent, if it was a 4-week month that month, $3,200 on TV. So we still came out almost $3,000 ahead.
Was D'Lo still on the ring crew? Would he have been paid twice? Or did him and Harold Varner already have their falling out?
I think that he and Harold may have had their falling out, and we got him off side of the road and took him off the ring crew by then. But yeah, he would have been, when he was on the ring crew, he was getting preliminary money, $75 plus whatever he got for the ring crew. Harold took the majority of it because it was his truck.
When it comes to all this money, do you pay yourself?
Oh, no. I never paid myself one fucking time for a Smoky Mountain Wrestling show because I'm a fucking idiot. No, I didn't pay myself. I paid, some of the times I'd pay the guys, it'd be my money that I was making from the That's why I had the WWF job, so I could afford to run Smoky Mountain Wrestling. That's why I put myself on some of the spot shows to wrestle a lot, because I could get an extra match out of me and I didn't have to fucking pay myself. I was getting $500 a week from Rick Rubin's financial team as a salary until we got things going, and that's what it stayed. I never wanted to ask for more money for myself while we needed other things for the company. This was a labor of love, not a fucking cash grab. But that's the thing. If this was not a huge show in Knoxville, it was one of our better ones, but certainly not one of the biggest ones, but it wasn't one of our shittier ones. It was a nice, a sweet spot there. And if you had 3 or 4 of those a week and a couple of spot shows, that's what I'm saying. This was not a time in wrestling where the business was making a lot of money in general. And that's the year that Vince lost $6 million, 1995. But the territory model, we didn't buy a plane ticket. Lawler lived 3 hours, he was in Memphis. So he came over because we had been doing the Memphis SMW versus USWA feud. Randy Hales was booking. Our guys had drawn them some money. Lawler, it was in the wrestling business. He knew what the fucking deal was. It's part of his company that he co-owns that we've been helping out. So he gets in a car and has somebody drive him over to Knoxville, and we give him a nice little payoff, and he helped out. And the next month he came back and dropped it and blah, blah, blah. There was no other plane tickets, no hotels. Everybody either lived in town or drove over from Nashville, 3 hours away. So you kept expenses down, and that's why I said the territories were capable of making really good money just by smaller mid-size houses in repetition. And that's why if we've been able to open up a couple of other markets the size of Knoxville to do a couple of these a week even, and then the spot shows, you'd be fine. That was a point in time where you weren't able to open enough television markets to run the live events, because the people would come to the live events if they could see it on television. But as I said, the only difference in this and an old time territory breakdown, as we'll see here in a second with Houston, is that the guys on top on my show would have made more because they wouldn't have been on guarantee. They'd have been being paid on the house, and the underneath guys would have made less. But they didn't say anything, because on all the small shows that we lost our ass on, they still got the same thing. So how can they argue for more money on the big house when they didn't argue for less money on the small house? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Some could, Couple did, but not for long.